The evening air was thick with the scent of salt and jasmine as Ryan leaned back into the warm cushion of a beachside bar in Santa Barbara. Laughter rose from the table beside him. 3 of his college roommates. Now older, married, some grayer than he remembered. All sipping their second round of craft beers. There was no music blasting. No camera crews. No performers or dancers. Just a slow crashing of waves. The occasional clink of glass. And stories that began with, "Remember when," and ended in the kind of laughter only shared histories could produce. It was the kind of bachelor party Ryan had wanted. No chaos, no theatrics, just the people who knew him best reminding him who he was before wedding plans. Color schemes and seating charts took over his calendar. He had turned down several suggestions to do something flashier. Vegas, a yacht, a private club in downtown LA, but none of that felt like him. Meanwhile, across the coastline, in a resort suite carved into the hills above the ocean, MIA was swirling champagne in a crystal flute and laughing a little louder than she had in months. Her dress shimmered with movement, golden in the low light. Around her, the energy was different, more electric, less grounded. The guests at her bachelorette party weren't all bridesmaids or childhood friends. A significant portion of them were Ryan's friends. Specifically, the groomsmen. It had been Mia's idea. Oddly enough, "We're all close anyway," she had said when she first suggested the joint party idea. "Why separate everyone? Let's just mix it up. Have one big night. We'll do our parts in our own corners. But we're all family at this point." Ryan hadn't objected. He liked that MIA got along with his friends. That she didn't play the role of a distant fiancée who only tolerated his past. She teased them, bantered with them, remembered details about their lives he sometimes forgot. He'd once said to her after a brunch, "You're like a glue for my friend group. They adore you." She had smiled, kissed his cheek, and whispered, "Good, that means they'll protect you when you get cold feet." He had laughed. He never imagined she would be the one to undo everything. The night at the resort unfolded in waves of curated indulgence. Champagne flowed, shots lined the bar, the lights dimmed to a seductive hue. Music pulsed in a steady rhythm that blurred time. They played games, drinking games, memory games, games meant to push comfort zones. And then, as the night slid past midnight, someone shouted, "Truth or dare." It started light, embarrassing high school stories, silly dares to sing along to bad songs or wear ridiculous accessories. But alcohol, as always, doesn't know how to stop at light. It wants to peel things back. MIA, radiant and buzzed, didn't hesitate when it was her turn. "Dare," she said with a wicked smile, eyes flaring with the edge of recklessness. One of the groomsmen, Zach, the loud one, the one Ryan used to room with, grinned. "All right, I dare you to kiss, all 3 of us." She raised an eyebrow. At the same time, laughter, applause, a chant of, "Do it, do it." It should have ended as a joke. A peck on the cheek. A theatrical curtsy, but the room was too hot. The wine too generous. The ego too alive. MIA stood. 1 kiss became 3. 3 became something else. Hands, mouths, limbs, laughter dissolving into gasps, boundaries forgotten, and at some point, no one was playing anymore. The door to the suite had not been fully shut, just slightly ajar. A corridor outside led to another villa. And in that villa, a guest who hadn't planned to be part of any party stepped outside for a cigarette. He heard it before he saw it. Then, curiosity, or maybe disgust, led him to glance through the opening. He pulled out his phone. The camera blinked red. The lens didn't judge, it only recorded. Back on the beach, Ryan was being toasted. "To the most loyal man we know," one of his friends said, lifting his glass. Ryan laughed, humbled, brushing a hand through his hair. "You guys are too much." "No, seriously," another said. "You're the only guy the first know who's never strayed. Not once. You make the rest of us look bad." Ryan smiled but didn't answer. He was thinking of MIA. Of how lucky he felt. Of how she was probably laughing right now, too. surrounded by the very people he trusted to stand beside him when he said, "I do." He didn't know that on the other side of the city, trust was unraveling in the shadows. That something sacred was being exchanged for something brief. That a single decision, blurred by champagne and games, was about to become a fracture that no apology could ever mend. And somewhere, a stranger was watching a video he hadn't meant to take, wondering what to do with it, wondering if truth, even when ugly, should be shared. Ryan wouldn't find out that night, or the next, but when he did, it wouldn't be the shouting that undid him. It would be the silence that had hidden it all. The silence of those he loved. And of the woman he thought he knew. The message arrived like a stone dropped into still water, rippling through everything Ryan thought he knew. It was late afternoon, the sky outside his window burnished with the final amber light of day. He had just returned from a long, meditative run, his breath still settling, his limbs loose with the satisfaction of movement. The sweat clung to the collar of his shirt as he bent to refill his water bottle. The house was quiet, anchored in that post-run calm that made everything seem briefly peaceful. Then his phone buzzed. He glanced toward it, expecting a reminder, a message from MIA perhaps, a photo, a playful update from her bachelorette night. They had agreed to do separate parties, a nod to tradition, but nothing about their relationship had ever really been traditional. There was trust between them, layered over years, that unspoken certainty, but the screen wasn't filled with emojis or soft words. Just a file, and a line of text. Your friends aren't who you think they are. Neither is she. No name, no sender, just those words. Ryan stared. For a long time, he didn't touch it. His thumb hovered over the screen like it might burn him. His first instinct was dismissal, spam. A cruel prank, but something about the phrasing, the precision, landed differently. There was no drama in the sentence. No accusation, just certainty. He opened the file. The video was poorly shot, as if the person recording had done so covertly. A door, ajar, a villa suite, dimly lit by amber sconces. A familiar laugh drifted in before the image cleared. MIA. His breath caught, not because he didn't recognize her, but because of how familiar she looked in that moment, unguarded. Flushed from champagne and midnight thrill. Her expression lit by something primal. And then he saw them. 3 men. Groomsmen. No, his groomsmen, his friends. Brothers not by blood, but by time. Zach, the joker from undergrad. Derek, who had helped him move apartments 3 times without asking for a beer. And Leo, his childhood friend. His best man. They weren't sitting beside her. They were on the bed. With her. There was laughter. MIA leaned over, her mouth brushing against Zach's cheek. Derek's hand trailed along her thigh. Leo whispered something that made her throw her head back and laugh. Her dress had slipped. Her straps hung loose. Their bodies tangled together like choreography that had been practiced. Ryan didn't blink. He didn't flinch. He just watched. Because this wasn't a moment of doubt. It wasn't the grainy suggestion of intimacy. It was a symphony of betrayal, blatant, collaborative, and effortless. The camera never moved in closer. It didn't need to. The frame captured too much already. 53 seconds. That's all it took to unmake the life he was building. When it ended, Ryan didn't replay it. He didn't curse, didn't pace. He stood completely still, as if the act of moving might break something that hadn't shattered yet. The kitchen had gone colder. Outside, the world carried on, children's laughter echoing from a nearby playground. A delivery truck backing into the lot next door. The everyday harmony of people unaware that in one apartment, someone had just become a stranger to his own future. Ryan placed the phone face down. Then he walked to the sink. The water ran, clear and cold. As he rinsed his hands though they weren't dirty, he stared at his reflection in the windowpane, superimposed over the street behind it. He looked the same, but something inside him had quietly died. He walked to the bedroom, opened the nightstand drawer, pulled out the velvet box. The ring was still beautiful, elegant, an emerald cut set in platinum, exactly what she had described one night half asleep. Years ago. He clicked it shut, Packed a bag, not with urgency, but ceremony. 2 shirts, a pair of jeans, the cologne MIA had given him last Christmas. He hesitated before placing it in, then left it on the table. 1 toothbrush, a framed photo of his mother, and the silence. He didn't write a note, didn't draft a text. Words were tools for repair. There was nothing left to fix. He left before the streetlights came on. The hotel was 3 towns over, anonymous enough for him to become a ghost. He paid in cash, signed the name only his brother had ever used, before the accident. The clerk didn't look twice. That night, lying on the stiff mattress, he didn't close his eyes. The ring stayed in the bag, buried in fabric. He didn't need to look at it. He already understood what it symbolized, a promise never given, a future returned to sender. He imagined the wedding, the speeches, the flowers, the promises, all of it burned to ash by one handheld lens. He didn't hate her, not yet, maybe not ever, but the image of her, of them, was branded now. Not because of what they did, but how easily they did it. How easily they laughed, how no one hesitated. The next morning, he ordered coffee at a roadside cafe. Black, no milk, no sugar. When the barista asked for his name, he gave a different one. One not tied to her. One without history. He sat by the window and let the heat of the cup ground him. No texts came, no missed calls. The world, it seemed, hadn't noticed that a man had walked out of his own life. And Ryan, staring into the middle distance, finally understood. He didn't need to scream. He didn't need to be understood. He didn't even need to be heard. All he needed was the strength to vanish with dignity. And never look back. There were no broken plates. No screaming matches or slamming doors. No cinematic crescendo of emotions tearing through furniture and hearts alike. When Ryan vanished, it was quiet, measured, the way a shadow disappears when the sun shifts just slightly. It had been 2 days since the video. He hadn't spoken to anyone. Not MIA, not the groomsmen, not even his sister, who had called twice and left a voicemail saying, "You okay? Just checking in." He never called back. What was there to say? There was a strange clarity in silence. A precision. Words, he realized, were for people who wanted something to survive. He didn't, not anymore. He didn't want to save the engagement, or salvage a friendship, or even explain the bruise that now lived behind his eyes like a permanent shadow. On the 3rd morning, he opened his laptop. No notifications, just the cold, waiting cursor on a blank screen. He clicked into the wedding management portal, cancelled the honeymoon suite, removed the block of guest rooms, notified the venue manager that there would be no ceremony, due to unforeseen personal circumstances. He typed, but that felt dishonest, so he deleted it, left the reason blank. Then, he opened a fresh email. 1 line of text, no greeting, no flourish. There will be no wedding. This is what loyalty looked like behind my back. He attached the video, not a link, not a redacted version, the full file, the truth, stripped of spin or subtext. And he sent it to the group chat, the one he had shared with the groomsmen for nearly 8 years. The one filled with old memes, fantasy football arguments, and 1,000 digital artifacts of what used to be brotherhood. The moment he hit send, something inside him released. Not catharsis, not satisfaction, just weight, like setting down a heavy box and realizing your arms were shaking only because they had been carrying too much for too long. He then went through his contacts and began blocking numbers. MIA, Zach, Derek, Leo, one by one. The connections were severed like frayed wires in a fire, not because he hated them, but because he refused to let any of them offer him the illusion of remorse. He didn't want apologies, didn't want explanations. The video had already spoken louder than any mouth could. He powered down the phone, packed a second bag, cash, passport, an old camera, a notebook. The ring, still sealed in its box, was left behind this time. Set neatly in the center of the dining table. He didn't leave a note beside it. That too, he believed, would be a kind of indulgence. He took the long route out of the city, driving past familiar streets with unfamiliar eyes. Everything felt thinner now, less substantial. The coffee shop where he'd once watched Mia read poetry now looked like a stage set. The bookstore where they'd bought travel guides together, just paper and ink. By sunset, he had crossed the county line. No destination, just away. Back in the city, the group chat began to buzz. A single, "What the hell?" appeared beneath the video. Then a longer silence. Then a cascade. Shock. Confession. Blame passed like a hot coal between them. Some denied. Some rationalized. Mia didn't reply immediately. When she did, it was only a single line. "Please, can we talk?" But there was no one left to answer her. No one knew where Ryan was. Not even his family. The apartment was locked. The keys left in the mailbox. The email address he'd used for the wedding planner had been deleted. The Ryan they knew had dissolved into the folds of the world. Untethered by the past. Unreachable by remorse. And the ring sat quietly on the table. Waiting for no one. He stopped somewhere along the coast 2 nights later. A town with no stoplights and a single motel that smelled of salt and old pine. The woman at the counter didn't ask questions. He paid cash. Gave a name that didn't belong to anyone. In the room, he pulled out the notebook. Opened to a blank page. He wrote, "To disappear is not cowardice. Sometimes it's the only way to survive." And beneath that, "I don't need them to regret what they did. I only need to remember who I am without them." He didn't cry, not because it didn't hurt, but because even grief had become too sacred to waste on people who hadn't treated it with care. Somewhere, miles away, his name was being cursed, questioned, cried over. But in this quiet room, all he heard was peace. And the slow exhale of a man who had finally stopped waiting for an apology that would never be enough. For nearly 48 hours, the group chat remained silent. Not a single reply, not a single emoji, no shock, no defense, just the cold, suspended air of something too heavy to touch. The video sat at the top of the thread like a loaded weapon no one dared to pick up. As if by ignoring it, they could somehow delay the explosion. Then, inevitably, it came. "What the F*** is this?" Zach wrote. His message was followed by 3 read receipts. Then an hour of silence. Leo responded next. Less defiant, more defensive. "We were drunk. It didn't mean anything." Derek replied with one word, "Jesus." And then came the flood. Accusations. Regrets. Excuses wrapped in sarcasm. Guilt passed around like contraband. No one took real ownership. Not at first. They fumbled with shame, trying to downplay what had happened. Trying to reduce a collective betrayal to an unfortunate night. But the camera hadn't lied. The timestamp hadn't blurred. And Ryan's absence from the chat was more damning than any reply. Because he was gone, erased, and that silence was their sentence. By day 3, their girlfriends began asking questions. Zach's girlfriend had seen the chat open on his iPad. Leo's fiancée noticed how pale he looked when scrolling through his phone. Derek's partner heard the tension in his voice during a half-explained phone call and decided to check his notifications while he showered. One by one, the truth unraveled. And so did the relationships. Zach's girlfriend threw his clothes onto the front lawn in front of their shared friends. Leo's fiancée cancelled their engagement party with a single post, "There's no party." Turns out loyalty is not a shared value. Derek came home to an empty apartment and a note that read, "You broke more than trust. You broke the future." The group chat became a graveyard of unspoken apologies, of passive-aggressive responses, of men trying to salvage reputations that were now unsalvageable. No one defended Mia. Not openly. Not when the video had stripped her bare in ways no filter or phrasing could mend. She tried. Of course she tried. Her first message was cautious. "We need to talk. All of us. There's context you don't understand." No reply. Then a voice note, her voice trembling. Trying to sound composed but cracking under the pressure. "It wasn't what it looked like. We were all drunk. It got out of hand. I never meant for this to happen. Please, just let me explain." Still nothing. She began calling. Zach didn't answer. Derek picked up, listened silently for 30 seconds. Then hung up without a word. Leo blocked her. The bridesmaids distanced themselves too. Not angrily, just with the kind of quiet that hurts more than rage. MIA noticed she was no longer tagged in posts. Stories she used to be in were deleted. Shared photos quietly archived. No one called her to ask how she was holding up. No one asked if she regretted it. Because they had all seen it. Not just the footage. The ease. The casual cruelty. The way she had smiled. MIA became something she never imagined she would be. A cautionary tale. She watched as her social circle collapsed in slow motion. Invitations dried up. Messages faded. People she had once considered family suddenly had plans when she reached out. Some didn't respond at all. Others sent short, polite responses that felt like eulogies for a friendship already dead. One of her oldest friends texted, "I love you, but I can't be in this with you. I don't know who you are anymore." MIA tried to fight it. She drafted posts. She wrote long paragraphs explaining the pressure she had felt. The alcohol, the disorientation of that night. The jokes that spiraled into something else. But every draft felt like an excuse. And she hated herself for how easily they came. So she deleted them. And she stayed quiet. Not because she was noble. But because she finally understood something. There are some things you can't talk your way out of. Some betrayals don't leave space for redemption. She wasn't just the woman who cheated. She was the one who betrayed not just her partner, but the integrity of a community built over years. She had fractured something sacred. Not only love, but loyalty, that silent code between people who believed in each other. Her phone became a dead thing. No pings, no rings. She would scroll through her contacts at night, reading names she no longer had the courage to call. She tried to call Ryan once. Just once. Blocked. And that, somehow, hurt more than anything. Not because she expected forgiveness, but because she realized forgiveness was not owed. It had to be earned. And she didn't know where to begin. So she didn't. She let the silence take her. And with each passing day, she felt herself fading, not from the world, but from the person she thought she was. Because once the circle collapses, what remains isn't just loneliness. It's the echo of your own voice, asking, "What have I done?" And knowing, fully, irrevocably, that there's no one left to answer. In the weeks that followed Ryan's disappearance, the unspeakable unraveled into aftermath. The kind that doesn't cry out but corrodes. Slowly, deeply. It began with the three groomsmen. They had walked into that night laughing, daring, half-drunkenly invincible, the kind of men who believed in the safety of shared history, in the insulation of inside jokes and private rituals. But that illusion shattered with the soundless arrival of a single video. And in its wake, each of them faced a reckoning. Zach tried to brush it off, at first. Said it was a mistake. Said it wasn't what it looked like. But his girlfriend had seen the footage. She had watched it in silence. Then asked only one question. "Do you understand what you just threw away?" He didn't answer. He didn't need to. The question itself had already dismantled the foundation they'd spent years building. She packed her things and left before he could respond. When he called to explain, she let it ring. The silence said enough. Derek lasted a few more days in denial. He told his circle of friends it had been a stupid blur. An isolated moment, a lapse in judgment. But people talk, people watch, and soon, the man who once hosted barbecues for everyone found himself uninvited, politely excluded from weekends, group chats, even casual hangouts. His girlfriend, who had been on the verge of moving in, withdrew. She said, "I don't want to build my life with someone I can't recognize when the lights go out." And Leo, the one who had stood to be Ryan's best man, disappeared entirely. Not out of cowardice, but out of shame. He left the city without saying goodbye. Changed his number, moved in with his brother in Oregon, telling only his sister. When someone asked about him weeks later, the answer came with a shrug. "I think he's trying to start over." Their brotherhood had disintegrated, and there was no salvaging it. But none fell as far as MIA. She had always been light. That's what people said about her. Light to be around, light in spirit, the kind of woman who walked into a room and made others feel like they belonged. The kind of fiancée who remembered your birthday, who danced barefoot at weddings, who toasted her friends with clever toasts and messy grace. She had curated that image carefully, not for others, but for herself. It was her compass, her mirror, and now, it was gone. It didn't vanish in a single moment. It dissolved in stages. The phone that stopped ringing, the invitations that never arrived, the friendly check-ins that turned into stares across grocery aisles. The worst part wasn't the hate. Hate had energy, had sound. What greeted MIA was worse: indifference. The cold, quiet realization that the world had kept turning without her. The women who had once asked her to help plan their baby showers stopped replying to her messages. The yoga group she'd led for 2 years found a new instructor. Clients she had freelanced for began offering her polite declines with no follow-up. She kept waiting for someone to ask what happened. Not to judge, just to listen, but no one did, because they already had their answer. The video had become more than proof. It had become story, myth, whispered shorthand for betrayal. There were no formal exiles. No town crier declaring her exile from the community. But the exile came nonetheless, in coffee shops that didn't meet her eyes. In doors that closed gently in her face. In the way people said, "Take care," without meaning it. She tried to keep moving. Tried to post again. Normal things, coffee mugs, sunsets, quotes about healing. But engagement was gone. Comments dried up. And eventually, she stopped posting altogether. Because pretending to exist in a world that no longer sees you is a wound of its own. She began to live more quietly, no longer out of shame, but because the world had turned the volume down on her life. She walked more, cooked more, deleted old texts, rearranged her furniture as if new angles could erase old shadows. Sometimes, she would sit in her car outside her old friends' homes and wonder what they were saying inside. If they laughed the same way. If her name ever came up. If the mention of her still felt like vinegar. She would imagine herself knocking, apologizing, explaining, but she never did, not because she didn't want to, but because she finally accepted a brutal truth. There are apologies that heal, and there are apologies that only serve the person giving them. She no longer needed to be forgiven to move forward, but moving forward came slowly, through silence, through space. Ryan was a ghost now. She didn't try to find him. She had thought about it, fantasized about running into him on some random street, explaining everything with tears in her throat, having him look at her like he used to. But the fantasy always ended the same way, with him walking away. Because she knew, she had made a choice. And the thing about choices is, they don't have to be made in hatred to be irreversible. She had chosen the laugh, the dare, the moment, and what she had lost wasn't just Ryan. It was the version of herself that believed some mistakes could be undone. In the months that followed, she stopped waiting for calls, stopped crafting the narrative. She let the story be what it was, not because she liked it, but because it was true. And sometimes, the only way forward is to live with the truth in your chest like a stone you carry, not to punish yourself, but to remember the weight of what you've done. So she lived, more simply, more slowly, not for redemption, not for applause, but because the silence left room for a different kind of growth. One that didn't need to be seen, just real, and in that, she found something she hadn't expected. Not peace, but permission to begin again. Alone. The rain had arrived without warning, not the dramatic kind that split the sky open, but the quiet, lingering drizzle that seemed to soften the sharp edges of the world. It tapped gently on the windows of Mia's small apartment, a kind of rhythmic hush, as though the sky itself had decided to mourn with her. She sat at the kitchen table, the only sound in the room the ticking of the old wall clock and the soft hum of the refrigerator. A blank email was open on her laptop. She had written nothing yet. Just stared at the blinking cursor as if it were daring her to speak aloud the truth she had been avoiding. It had been months, since the wedding that never was. Since Ryan disappeared into a silence so absolute it became sacred. Since her world, once overflowing with connection and noise and plans, had dulled into a monochrome version of itself. But today, something had shifted. Maybe it was the rain. Maybe it was the exhaustion of holding herself together for too long. Or maybe it was the simple desire to put it all somewhere. Somewhere it could be seen, even if never read. So she began to type. She started at the beginning, not the betrayal, not the moment the door closed, but long before, the night Ryan had proposed. How his hands had trembled slightly as he opened the box. The way her chest had bloomed with a kind of joy so pure it had frightened her. The way she had whispered yes before he even finished asking. She wrote about the laughter, the small moments, the domestic details of a life in construction, his coffee rituals, her tendency to leave books open face down, their shared playlists, their shared future. And then, she wrote about the night. She didn't romanticize it, didn't hide behind metaphors. She named it, named them, admitted the choices, the drinks, the pressure, the heat in the room that made right and wrong feel like theories. She did not excuse it, but she owned it, not for redemption, but for herself. She wrote about the silence that followed, the messages unanswered, the calls unreturned, the faces of people she once loved becoming unfamiliar, afraid to look her in the eyes, the slow stripping of identity, the erasure. And finally, she wrote to Ryan, not to ask him to come back, not to beg, but to tell him one thing that had sat like a stone in her chest. I don't expect forgiveness, I only hope for quiet. When she finished, she stared at the screen for a long time. Her fingers hovered over the send button. Then, slowly, deliberately, she moved the email into drafts. She never sent it. It wasn't for him. It was for her. Somewhere far from the city. In the northern hills where fog clings to pine trees and roads wind like thoughts. Ryan sat on the porch of a cabin built by hands older than memory. No internet, no reception, just a wood stove, a journal, and the sky. He had not returned to his old life. Not even to visit. The people from that world no longer reached out. Maybe they respected his distance. Maybe they feared the reflection his silence would offer them. He had let go of all of it. He spent his days hiking, writing, cooking meals that required patience. He spoke to no one but the wind, the birds, the occasional hiker passing through. At night, he lit a lamp and opened his journal. The entries were not angry. They were quiet, steady, observational. Tonight, he wrote, mass betrayal doesn't deserve silence. But I can walk away, without hatred. He underlined the last 3 words. There had been anger once. A bone-deep fury that turned his hands cold. But time had smoothed it. Or maybe it was the landscape. The way the hills breathed without permission. The way the stars didn't care who was watching. He had come here to escape. He stayed because healing had its own weather. And his soul needed a slower season. He had not seen the email Mia never sent. He wouldn't, and if he had, he wouldn't have replied, not out of cruelty, but because the reply she needed wasn't his to give. In truth, he no longer needed answers. Her face had become a memory, her voice a sound that no longer had power. He carried the wound, yes, but it had scarred over into something oddly graceful. Forgiveness, he had learned, isn't always about absolving someone else. Sometimes, it's about releasing the weight of what cannot be undone. So he walked, through a golden field just beyond the cabin, where the grasses reached his knees and the sun hung low like a final thought. The wind tugged gently at his sleeves. The path was soft with earth and silence. And in his eyes, no hatred remained, only peace, only distance, and the quiet strength of a man who had been broken, but chose not to break others in return. The sky darkened behind him. And the story ended, not with revenge, not with reunion, but with the kind of ending that leaves no echo. Just the sound of footsteps walking forward. Alone, whole,